Part 1. Out of the Blue. Chapter 1. A Glimpse of the Unseen. In the course of human history, many fortunate souls have been graced with an unexpected moment or brief period of great revelation, an intuitive or directly perceived unveiling of a supernatural or divine reality, a glimpse of the unseen. Experiences of this kind are characterized by a heightened or expanded consciousness, in which the nature of reality becomes clearer by direct inner apprehension. Frequently, normal human thinking processes are temporarily suspended in a personal experience of the divine, often of the divine immanence or presence. Such states of consciousness are summarized and hinted at in the well-known observation of the English mystical poet and painter William Blake, 1757 to 1827. If the doors of perception were cleansed, then everything would appear as it is, infinite. In ancient Greece, such an experience was called an epiphany, epiphania, which means an appearing. Spiritual or mystical epiphanies, for epiphanies can also be moments of sudden intellectual insight, come in many forms and to a wide variety of people, and are frequently life-changing in impact. The result is often a deep and long-lasting conversion from one way of being to another. In many cases, the realization may have been pressing upon the conscious mind for some time, before the floodgates were broken down in a seemingly unheralded revelation. But how and why do such experiences arise? In essence, human beings are spiritual beings who, for the most part, have lost awareness of the divine and all-pervading reality, the ocean of spirit within which all creatures live and move and have their being. When the mind is burdened by thoughts and emotions associated with material existence, the essential inner spirit is forgotten. Though this spirit is the source of life, awareness of its presence becomes lost amid the demands of everyday existence. But when this spiritual consciousness breaks through the cloud of material thoughts and emotions and shines into a person's mind, bringing with it a new understanding and perspective, when the veil is lifted and a person experiences something of the universal, eternal, divine presence, that is called a mystical or spiritual epiphany. Some have called it a religious experience, but it transcends the confines of traditional religion, however an individual may interpret it. Experiences of this nature may occur suddenly and arise unbidden in the midst of daily life. Others may come upon a person as a result of prolonged meditational practice or profound thought on spiritual matters. However they may come about, description does little justice to the experience, and many of those so blessed have said that they have struggled to find words to describe their experiences adequately. As one of the writers quoted here observes, "We do not see that the moment God can be named, he ceases to be God." A common refrain concerning such experiences is that the beauty of nature and the joy it can engender in the heart is, as the English priest William Law, 1686 to 1761, puts it, heaven breaking through the veil. All that is sweet, delightful, and amiable in this world, in the serenity of the air, the fineness of seasons, the joy of light, the melody of sounds, the beauty of colors, the fragrancy of smell, the splendor of precious stones, is nothing else but heaven breaking through the veil of this world, manifesting itself in such a degree and darting forth in such variety, so much of its own nature. William Law, An Appeal to All That Doubt. But the beauty does not lie without. George William Russell, 1867 to 1935, Irish poet, painter, nationalist, theosophist, and writer on mystical topics, notes that it is the inner consciousness that is moved by this divine beauty, not the external senses. Our hearts were drunk with the beauty our eyes could never see. George William Russell, The Unknown God. In fact, when the spirit within is suffused with joy and bliss, everything, whatever it may be, is seen as a wonderful play of the Supreme. Evelyn Underhill, 1875 to 1941, known especially for her mystical writings, recalls, I still remember walking down the Notting Hill main road and observing the extremely sordid landscape with joy and astonishment. Even the movement of the traffic had something universal and sublime in it. Evelyn Underhill, in Life of Evelyn Underhill. It seems that love, joy, and bliss are fundamental aspects of higher consciousness, so it is no surprise that many have enjoyed experiences of a similar nature. In Psychology of Religion, an anonymous source is quoted, "It was like entering into another world, a new state of existence. Natural objects were glorified. My spiritual vision was so clarified that I saw beauty in every material object in the universe. The woods were vocal with heavenly music." In Varieties of Religious Experience, a Mr. Peake is quoted, "When I went in the morning into the fields to work, the glory of God appeared in all his visible creation. I well remember we reaped oats, and how every straw and head of the oats seemed, as it were, arrayed in a kind of rainbow glory, or to glow, if I may so express it, in the glory of God." The science writer and journalist J.W.N. Sullivan, 1886 to 1937, notable among other things for explaining the ideas of Einstein in popular language, speaks of a similar experience. It is only in exceptional moods that we realize how wonderful are the commonest experiences of life. It seems to me sometimes that these experiences have an inner side as well as the outer side we normally perceive. At such moments, one suddenly sees everything with new eyes. One feels on the brink of some great revelation. It is as if we caught a glimpse of some incredibly beautiful world that lies silently about us all the time. I remember vividly my first experience of the kind when, as a boy, I came suddenly upon the quiet miracle of an ivy-clad wall glistening under a London street lamp. I wanted to weep and I wanted to pray, to weep for the paradise from which I had been exiled, and to pray that I might yet be made worthy of it. Such moments are rare in my experience, but their influence is permanent. J.W.N. Sullivan, But for the Grace of God. Whatever may be happening in the external world, this kind of joy and love is always available within oneself. In a collection of letters to his nephew, Victor Gollancz, 1893 to 1967, living in England during the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, nevertheless speaks of 1942 as a year of wonder. Despite the horrors of the raging conflict engulfing the world and his awareness of what was happening to the Jews in Europe, he felt a universal oneness, love, and beauty enveloping himself, all human beings, and everything he saw around him. Born in London to Jewish parents of German and Polish background, Gollancz became well known as a prolific writer, publisher, humanitarian, and social activist in the cause of peace, goodwill, and social equality. Describing himself as pro-humanity and against all that creates divisions between different peoples, he collected together several best-selling anthologies of material demonstrating the commonality of the spiritual truths underlying the world's religious traditions. Of the year 1942, he relates, "How shall I find the words to describe to you, my dear Timothy, what I felt in my year of wonder, 1942? I had a heightened perception of everything, and everything was perceived as beautiful and good. But it was more than a perception, it was a meeting, for which I had gone out to the other, and for which the other had gone out to me. A meeting with everything's self, which at the same time was my self. With the greenness, the freshness, the slenderness, the littleness, the gentleness, the strength, the taperingness, the sun-acceptingness, the daisy and buttercup enclosingness of the benign and far-stretching grass, with the trees and their various species, and with every branch and every twig and every leaf of them, with stones and mold and air and sun and a deck chair in the garden and a car down the lane and a spire on the downs and the wall of our house as I come in for lunch at 1, and with people. I would sit, going up to London in a crowded railway compartment, and know myself as in every one of my fellow travelers, and know every one of them as in me. I was in the Royal Automobile Club, of all places, on an afternoon that summer, and my eye happened to fall on a door. It was quite an ordinary door, insofar as any single thing in the universe is ordinary, with small panels and big panels and a knob, but I tell you that this door, and the look and the sound and the life of it, filled me with joy inexpressible." Victor Gollancz, My Dear Timothy. As many have said, the beauty we perceive in nature is the divine essence shining through the material world. Paraphrasing a line from Goethe's Faust, the Scottish writer and philosopher Thomas Carlyle, 1795 to 1881, speaks of nature as the living, visible garment of God. This is a constant theme among those attempting to describe experiences of heightened consciousness. We are embedded in and embraced by the divine, and an awareness of this reality seems to be more apparent in nature than in many of the things that we human beings create. But why should this be so? Perhaps it is partly because nature goes about its business without ego, its processes unfolding automatically. So to be in harmony with nature helps, at least temporarily, to reduce the ego within ourselves, which mystics say is the fundamental barrier between us and God. And when the ego is diminished, we automatically begin to feel His presence and His love. Or maybe it is simply that we are looking at His garment without an overlay of human activity, undertaken without awareness of the divine, and consequently out of harmony with the continuous outworking of His creative energy. When human activity is permeated by a perception of beauty, however that beauty may be understood, then a certain harmony and beauty become apparent. Think of sacred art and music, or the many sacred buildings of the world. But because human creations, beautiful or otherwise, pass through human minds, the beauty we create is of a different character to that of nature left unattended. Human thinking and motivation are usually evident in humanly crafted beauty, while unspoilt nature demonstrates only the awesome wonder of the divine in action. However we may try to understand it, there is no doubt that a sense of the divine is often more evident in the beauty of nature than in other aspects of our material existence. Joseph Estlin Carpenter, 1844 to 1927, a Unitarian minister, Sanskrit scholar, and one of the first students of comparative religion, describes how, in a moment of peaceful relaxation in nature, his perception of the world was changed. "I went out one afternoon for a walk alone. I was in the empty, unthinking state in which one saunters along country lanes, simply yielding oneself to the casual sights around, which give a town-bred lad with country yearning such intense delight. Suddenly I became conscious of the presence of something else. I cannot describe it, but I felt that I had direct perception of the being of God all round about me. It was an immediate act of spiritual apprehension. It came unsought, absolutely unexpectedly. I remember the wonderful transfiguration of the far-off woods and hills as they seemed to blend in the infinite being with which I was thus brought into relation. This experience did not last long, but it sufficed to change all my feeling. I had not found God because I had never looked for him, but he had found me. And similarly, from an anonymous source, I was 35 at the time of the experience. It happened thus. On April 13th, 1905, at 8 a.m., I was standing among pine trees looking out at the sky, when suddenly the heavens opened, as it were, and caught me up. I was swept up and out of myself altogether into a flood of white glory. I had no sense of time or place. The ecstasy was terrific while it lasted. It could have lasted only a minute or two. It went as suddenly as it came. I found myself bathed with tears, but they were tears of joy. I felt one with everything and everybody, and somehow I knew that what I had experienced was reality, and that reality is perfection. B.E.B. in Watcher on the Hills, a study of some mystical experiences of ordinary people. Others have enjoyed similar experiences. Sometimes this is accompanied by an underlying awareness of the cosmic music, as the ancient Greeks called it, of the dynamic creative energy or vibration of the divine that is constantly active, continuously bringing the creation into being and sustaining it every moment. It was one of those gloriously lovely days that one sometimes sees in early summer in England. A cloudless, vividly blue sky with brilliant sunshine. It was morning. The air was shimmering with the moisture from the evaporating dew. I was walking on the lawn looking at the masses of flowers in the herbaceous border. As a gardener, I was interested in what was coming up into flower. As an artist, I was enjoying the combination of color, light, and shade. Suddenly, as I paused in contemplation, I was lifted into another world. I did not seem to be inside myself, though I was still looking normally at the flower border. Everything also had become transparent. But what was so amazing was the fact that I was not only seeing the colors, I was hearing the colors. Every color was an indescribably exquisite musical sound, the whole making a harmony that no instruments could produce. I do not know how long this illumination lasted, perhaps not more than a second or two, but as I came back to earth, so to speak, I knew that I had been in reality. The memory of it has remained vivid and real ever since, and has brought me the greatest happiness and understanding. Now I know. I am truly thankful for this gift of knowledge. M.I.D. in Watcher on the Hills. As the 15th century Indian mystic Kabir put it, the inward and the outward are become as one sky. Experiences of the divine can be so unexpected that the mind, though temporarily in a state of quietude, is still prompted to seek an answer to the experience in familiar cultural or religious terms. Brother Mandis, 1907 to 1988, a charismatic Christian and spiritual healer, interprets his experience in terms of his belief system. I remember now, and I am always recalling it, the greatest experience in my life, that vital moment when I was baptized by the Holy Spirit within. For one perfect second, unexpected, unheralded, and while I was doing a trivial task, my personal mind and body were fused in light, a breathless, unbearable, light perfection, as intense as the explosion of a flash of lightning within me. In this timeless second, I knew a love, knowledge, and ecstasy transcending anything I could understand or describe. I was lifted into the midst of God, in whom all people, all worlds, and every created life or thing moved and had their being. Perfection! Had I been suffering from the worst mental or physical disease known to man, in that light I should instantly have been made whole. In that moment I knew my Lord dwells within my own being and within everyone else. In that one moment I knew the truth of His eternal reality, and that He is all, that my Father and I are one, that all people and the Father are one, and that we are all one with each other in spirit. Brother Mandus, this wondrous way of life. Others have simply understood their experience as a revelation of God, but of a God that is far beyond all naive and anthropomorphic human conceptions. It was as though I had suddenly pushed up through the mists into a clear, beautiful atmosphere. I neither saw nor heard. I just felt an indescribable ecstasy as I was suddenly conscious of an overwhelming love, which seemed to encompass all that was and is and will be. It was all-encompassing and personal at the same time, and lifted me to superb heights. I can remember feeling exultantly, this is God, and that God, after all, was both personal and immense. I wish I had at my command the words which would truly convey the power, the depth, the infinity, the gentleness, the serenity, and the intimacy which intermingled then. Somehow one doesn't separate the qualities which were evident. One just wants to enjoy the oneness of it all. Mrs. L. in Watcher on the Hills. Children, too, innocent and untouched by the world, to some extent, are open to the divine, for they are no less spiritual beings than adults. Indeed, their minds are often far less cluttered. And for the little girl in this next account, yet to develop the complexities of conceptual and intellectual thought, the answer again arises spontaneously from within. I must have been between 5 and 6 when this experience happened to me. It was a summer morning, and the child I was had walked through the orchard alone, and come out on the brow of a sloping hill, where there was grass and a wind blowing, and one tall tree reaching into infinite immensities of blueness. Quite suddenly, after a moment of quietness there, earth and sky and tree and wind-blown grass and the child in the midst of them came alive together with a pulsing light of consciousness. There was a wild foxglove at the child's feet and a bee dozing about it, and to this day I can recall the swift inclusive awareness of each for the whole, I in them and they in me, and all of us enclosed in a warm, lucent bubble of livingness. I remember the child looking everywhere for the source of this happy wonder, and at last she questioned, God? Because it was the only awesome word she knew. Deep inside, like the murmurous swinging of a bell, she heard the answer. God, God. How long this ineffable moment lasted, I never knew. It broke like a bubble at the sudden singing of a bird, and the wind blew, and the world was the same as ever, only never quite the same. The experience so initiated has been the one abiding reality of my life, unalterable except in the abounding fullness and frequency of its occurrence. Anonymous, in Experiences Facing Death. For those whose inner life is not entirely lost to the demands of material existence, Being alone in nature can often lead to a mood of quiet contemplation and a sense of wonder. Being alone is significant because at that time the mind is undistracted by interaction with others, however harmonious the relationships may be. Reaching a state of relative inner stillness, the spirit is open to the flow of divine grace, which imparts to consciousness the ability to perceive what envelops it all the time. There are many who do not associate their love of nature with divine immanence. Yet for some, this love can sometimes, unexpectedly, be taken to a more intense level. Just so does the British novelist and journalist William Hale White, 1831 to 1913, writing under the pen name of Mark Rutherford, describe the transformation of his lifelong love of nature into something deeper. Experiencing a spontaneous expansion of consciousness, his intellectual belief, or creed, derived from books, becomes, in a moment, an intense conviction that all life is one and that there is nothing to fear from death. I was no longer young. In fact, I was well over 60. The winter had been dark and tedious. For some reason or other, I had not been able to read much, and I began to think there were signs of the coming end. Suddenly, with hardly any warning, spring burst upon us. Day after day we had clear, warm sunshine, which deepened every contrast of color, and at intervals we were blessed with refreshing rains. I spent most of my time out of doors on the edge of a favorite wood. All my life I had been a lover of the country, and had believed, if this is the right word, that the same thought, spirit, life, God, which was in everything I beheld, was also in me. But my creed had been taken over from books. It was accepted as an intellectual proposition. Most of us are satisfied with this kind of belief, and even call it religion. We are more content the more defined the object becomes, no matter whether or not it is in any intimate relationship with us, and we do not see that the moment God can be named, he ceases to be God. One morning when I was in the wood, something happened, which was nothing less than a transformation of myself and the world, although I believed nothing new. I was looking at a great, spreading, bursting oak. The first tinge from the greenish-yellow buds was just visible. It seemed to be no longer a tree away from me and apart from me. The enclosing barriers of consciousness were removed, and the text came into my mind. Thou in me, and I in thee. The distinction of self and not self was an illusion. I could feel the rising sap. In me also sprang the fountain of life, uprushing from its roots, and the joy of its outbreak at the extremity of each twig, right up to the summit, was my own. That which kept me apart was nothing. I do not argue. I cannot explain. It will be easy to prove me absurd, but nothing can shake me. Thou in me, and I in thee. Death! What is death? There is no death. In thee, it is impossible, absurd. Mark Rutherford, An Epoch. According to the popular idiom, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which means, effectively, that beauty is in the mind of the beholder, and, by extension, that the entire world lies within our own consciousness. The British scholar and theologian James B. Mawsley, 1813 to 1878, points out that no allowance is made for the existence of such beauty in the mindset of those who see natural processes from only a utilitarian perspective. The beauty of nature is a distinct revelation made to the human mind, apart from that of its use. When the materialist has exhausted himself in efforts to explain utility in nature, it would appear to be the peculiar office of beauty to rise up suddenly as a confounding and baffling extra, which was not even formally provided for in his scheme. James B. Mosley, Sermons. In fact, as some fortunate individuals have experienced, every particle of the universe is infused with a divine energy and beauty that give things a significance far outweighing their usefulness. Everything, however seemingly insignificant, is full of the same wondrous vitality and life. In the psychic sense, an anonymous source is quoted. I was sitting on the seashore, half listening to a friend. Unconsciously to myself, I looked at a film of sand I had picked up on my hand. Instead of being dull, I saw that each particle was made up on a perfect geometrical pattern, with sharp angles, from each of which a brilliant shaft of light was reflected, while each tiny crystal shone like a rainbow. The rays crossed and recrossed, making exquisite patterns of such beauty that they left me breathless. I was used, at odd intervals, to seeing the invisible counterpart of minute objects, but this was quite unexpected and fascinating. Then, suddenly, my consciousness was lighted up from within, and I saw in a vivid way how the whole universe was made up of particles of materials which, no matter how dull and lifeless they might seem at first sight, were nevertheless filled with this intense and vital beauty. For a second or two, the whole world appeared as a blaze of glory. When it died down, it left me something I have never forgotten, and which constantly reminds me of the beauty locked up in every minute speck of material around me. The experience recalls the well-known words with which William Blake begins his Auguries of Innocence. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. A sense of the all-encompassing divine beauty and immanence is an experience from which many poets have drawn inspiration. As the English poet William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850, admits, "And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime, of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize, in nature and the language of the sense, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being." William Wordsworth, Tintern Abbey. The divine is eternally present in all things and all beings. Not only is he present, but he is ever at work. Things exist only by virtue of his dynamic presence, and perhaps one of the most illuminating observations reported in these accounts is that this all-pervading presence can be experienced as a cosmic vibration that can be heard. We are familiar with sound and music, and so may understand it as such, but it is far beyond all physical experience and human conception. Some have even called it the voice of God. It is this force, or power, or energy that the ancient Greeks called the Logos, the divine creative word. All things were made by it, says the unknown author of John's Gospel in his opening statement. It is, says the biblical Proverbs, a master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence, at play everywhere in his world, delighting to be with the sons of men. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 30 to 31. But this is another story, and here is not the place to tell it, save to say that this immanent and all-pervading power is well known and has been called by many names in the spiritual traditions of the world.